First, her style and design.
Southampton, England, the naming ceremony of P&O's latest superliner, Aurora. At 76,000 tons, she's the biggest ship in the P&O Cruises fleet. The ceremony is designed with all the pomp and circumstance of a royal occasion, with a guest list to match.
I named this ship Aurora. May God bless her and all who sail in her.
Superstitious seafarers shuddered at the ill omen of the champagne bottle not breaking, but the band struck up and the streamers flew, so there was no going back. And the sun was shining brightly and the ship looked magnificent, so any doom-laden thoughts were quickly forgotten. The German town of Pappenberg 18 months earlier. Situated in the far northwest of the country, close to the border with the Netherlands, and more than 40 kilometers from the sea, it seems an unlikely place for Aurora's story to start. Yet Pappenberg is home to the world's largest covered shipyard, Meyer Werft. This reception is being held to announce the building of Aurora and to introduce the major players to the press. They include David Dingle, P&O's Corporate Development Director, Bernard Meyer, the Managing Director of Meyer Werft, and Gwyn Hughes, Managing Director of P&O Cruises. But the real star is undoubtedly the planned ship. In London, at P&O's Pall Mall headquarters, they're in a bullish mood, and Chairman Lord Stirling points to the American market as a vision for the future of cruising.
It's developed very strongly in America, which is quite interesting because basically Americans are not what I would consider a maritime people as such because of the sheer size of its continent. But it really has become a very major form of leisure, if you want, in the States. I think as well that in America it started to become mainstream. In other words, it's not a niche leisure activity, which it was and still is to a degree here. It's almost on the basis, where should we go on holiday? We could go to the south of France, we could go on a cruise, we could do that. Once you start talking that way, it then becomes, if you want, a major form of leisure. We haven't reached that point as yet in this country, and we're still opening up, if you want, the different forms of cruising.
The cruise industry has been on a roll for years. The UK market alone had increased by a massive 25% in the previous year. But it's still a big decision to gamble $320 million on a new ship. The bottom line is that P&O can't afford to be left out of the game.
We acknowledge that times were moving forward very quickly in the cruise industry. In particular, British cruise passengers were more and more experiencing cruise products in various parts of the world, particularly in the Caribbean. Therefore, what we needed to do was to absorb all these fast-moving developments within the cruise industry at large and make sure that we incorporated those new features and new developments in the Aurora project.
The P&O Cruises division, which includes P&O Cruises operating out of Britain and Princess Cruises operating out of the States, carries more than 700,000 passengers a year. The last addition to the UK-based fleet had been Oriana, but P&O were keen to make the new ship different.
In the same way that those three ships are different, we are keen to make sure that Aurora has a different feel again. And Aurora's personality, if you like, will be very contemporary, world-class superliner, and she will have an indulgence and a chic style that's all her own. The reason for having different personalities for different ships, I think, is important because the market in the UK is, while still quite small, is really starting to grow quickly. So therefore the market itself is starting to mature. People want different things, they want different types of cruising. So the strength for P&O is that we have something for everyone.
To that end, the designers sat down at their computers and began to dream. Meanwhile, what's known as a new build team was working at the company's Southampton base to realise that dream, but to be pragmatic about it.
Essentially, P&O Cruises wanted a ship that could operate cruises out of the UK, so she needed to have good seakeeping, good speed. She has to have a long, slender bow to cut through the waves and to get out through the bad weather in the Bay of Biscay to get down to the Mediterranean as quickly as possible. And to do that, to maintain a high speed in rough weather, you need a hull that's optimised for that sort of weather rather than perhaps for a Caribbean type ship that might have a fuller form because the weather is less extreme in that region.
Over in Germany, staff at the Meyer-Werft shipyard were also busy working on the art of the possible. One of the early considerations is the shape of the hull itself.
You have to come to certain compromises for the underwater body shape in relationship to the length, in relationship to the speed of the ship. This is what is dominating, and that's why you are defining a certain kind of block coefficient. The block coefficient is a relationship between the box you would get if you have the depth of the ship, the length of the ship, and the breadth of the ship. This is giving a box. And then the shape of the underwater is only a percentage of this box. The displacement, the speed, the length of the ship is very much married to each other. And this has been found historically during the development of shipbuilding. And there is always a relationship to be kept. Otherwise, the power you have to bring in such a ship is becoming much too high, and then the economical factor is going down rapidly.
Aurora's sister ship, Oriana, had suffered initial vibration problems at high speeds. The P&O team were determined to do everything possible on Aurora to avoid that problem and began to tackle it early on.
We wanted to try and improve on the vibration characteristics that we had on the previous ship, on the Oriana, which, whilst satisfactory, were only just satisfactory, and we were certainly looking for an improvement there. And so at the aft end you will see the ship has a rather distinctive shape and what we call a ducktail on the end because it looks like a duck. And the effect of this is to increase the waterline length and to improve the flow of water into the propellers, and the better the flow and the stability of the flow into the propellers, the less likely they are to make noise due to cavitation.
One of the most important jobs to be done early on is the creation of what's known as a General Arrangement Plan, or GAP. Space is at a premium on a ship, and it's the GAP that divides up that space.
The General Arrangement Plan is a very, very important plan because it is part of the contract. Everybody is getting his portion of the cake as well out of this General Arrangement Plan. That's why the discussions about this General Arrangement Plan are taking a certain period of time as well, because you have to find compromises. Not only the shipyard, but as well in between the owner's side. They are fighting each other. I want to grab that, I want to grab that. So they have to come to compromises as well, with the target, of course, that everybody can, or each department from the owner's side can work comfortably with the space which is left for him.
P&O ships do round-the-world trips every year, and to do that, a ship has to be able to get through the Panama Canal. The canal was completed in 1914, is 64 kilometers long, and joins the Pacific to the Atlantic. But more importantly, sections are just 91.5 meters wide, and that means to be able to go through it, a ship's width is restricted.
When we are starting with such a project, then we are simulating the ship in the Panama Canal lock, and we have to look for all boundaries to make sure that we can pass later on. And from this simulation, we are printing out drawings, and they have to be approved by the authority in Panama.
The Panama was widened once in the 70s, but there are no plans for further widening. Oriana gets through the canal with less than 2/3 of a meter leeway on either side. But sections of Aurora were being designed that were wider than Oriana. P&O wanted some 40% of the cabins on the new ship to have balconies. They couldn't make the cabins smaller, so they had to make the ship wider. But then, how to get through the canal?
The extra balconies have resulted in a fairly radical change to the superstructure from our point of view. In fact, if you look above the lifeboats, the superstructure actually flares out to give more width in the superstructure, so we can incorporate a decent sized balcony on the 3 decks above the lifeboat braces.
The section that juts out doesn't just have to clear the canal, but also the so-called mules, the small rail engines that tow the ship through. To change the basic shape of a ship so radically has knock-on effects, both on how it'll operate at sea and how much it's going to cost to build. To help predict those effects, one tool employed is tank testing.
This is done with every ship, even sometimes before the final contract is signed, to really know what you have to expect, because you have to know with tank testing you're fixing the size and the type of the main engines, or let me say nowadays the electric capacity of the ship. And this is very important, because this is automatically linked as well to the expenses you have, and that's why it is important to have a feeling. We have to say we have, of course, measures for theoretical calculation on it, but this is still to be confirmed by the tank testing.
One of the main concerns for the engineers is that Aurora is designed to be fast, with a cruising speed of 24 knots, as she'll be making long journeys across open oceans.
The question is how quick or how fast a vessel should run. This is the main consumer of the energy, but besides, you also need a lot of power for accommodation. That means air conditioning, water supply, and all what the passengers like to be on board is more or less electric driven. So you have to make a guess what will be the hotel service load in different conditions, because you have to consider that you are not only in summer, sometimes you are in winter. These are ships which are going worldwide. So you have to consider all those respects to make a electric load balance for that purpose. And then, okay, you have to estimate what kind of diesel or what kind of energy sources you have to install in the ship.
The answer to that question lay in the small Bavarian town of Augsburg near Munich. In the Middle Ages, a major trader in gold, silver and copper, the town is now home to a heavier type of metal. The MAN B&W factory, manufacturers of some of the biggest engines in the world, is based here. This one's a relative baby. This is more like it. But does a customer ask for a type of engine that the company already makes, Or do they get MAN to design engines to need?
A lot of our customers are very familiar with our diesel engine program, but normally they have in mind only a certain output of an engine, and they ask us which type of engine we could offer them.
And this is the engine they offered P&O for Aurora, a 14-cylinder V-engine, so called because of the arrangement of the cylinders.
It's a V-engine, 14 cylinders altogether, with an output of 1,050 kW per cylinder, all in all 14,700 kW. That means more than 20,000 horsepower. They have 4 engines in one engine room, and that's a diesel-electric plant, so you go via generators.
Oriana had been fitted with a diesel mechanical system. Aurora is to get diesel electric.
In a diesel electric ship, you work on the concept of an electrical power plant that provides all the power for electric propulsion and for what we call the hotel load, and the hotel load is the air conditioning, the lighting, etc., etc. And we've got 4 big generators all producing electrical power.
Bremen in northwest Germany is just over 2 hours' drive from the Meyer Werft yard in Pappenberg. It's the home of Lloyd Dynamo Werke, or LDW. Aurora's demands for electricity on the so-called hotel side will be greater than for other P&O ships, mainly due to the increase in the number of passenger galleys catering for the ship's new eating areas.
Making an electrical machine of this size is very labor intensive because there are no machines, and it cannot be done by robots due to the number of machines required worldwide. We don't manufacture on stock and selling on stock machine. All our machines are tailor-made according to the specification of the owner, classification and consulting companies.
The installed power of Aurora will be an astounding 58,800 kilowatts, equal to a staggering 80,000 horsepower. Aurora's predecessor, Oriana, is powered by a diesel mechanical system, mainly because the Meyer Werft shipyard had more experience in that setup at the time. They dissuaded P&O from going diesel electric. This time, however, P&O convinced the yard.
All our new building ships are built with diesel electric propulsion. So in fact this was just a natural extension of all the other new building ships that are in progress at the moment. And I think finally Meyer Werft realised that this was the way to go and that there were no penalties in terms of increased costs for them in adopting a diesel electric propulsion system.
At the Meyer Werft yard in Pappenberg, work has begun on the sheets of metal that provide the basic structure of a large ship like Aurora. These sheets will be cut and shaped into different sections of the ship called blocks. Each sheet is numbered and will eventually form part of a block. Each block is also given a number, and by following the general arrangement plan, the blocks are put together a bit like a Lego kit. Aurora will have 62 blocks. The sheets are cut into shape underwater in order to keep the intense heat concentrated. The yard's task stretches ahead of them, and what a task. Aurora, when she's finished, will weigh 76,000 tons. At 270 meters, she'll be the length of 11 tennis courts. Standing 62 meters tall, she'll be 10 meters higher than the Niagara Falls. At 32 meters wide, she could cruise down the Mall in London with just 3 meters to spare. The yard will be building a structure that will carry around 1,800 passengers and over 800 crew. The ship will have 934 cabins, including 2 two-deck penthouse suites, 10 suites with balconies, 18 mini-suites with balconies, 96 staterooms with balconies, and 272 standard rooms with balconies. There'll be 2 main restaurants, a deck restaurant, a deck cafe, a 24-hour bistro, and a coffee bar, to say nothing of the 12 bars and pubs. And all of these will be housed in the steel structure being put together here in Pappenberg. Beyond all this is the need for the yard to make sure that the steel they're making the ship with, or rather the way they're putting that steel together, will be up to the stresses and strains of long sea voyages.
We have to calculate the strength of the vessel according to the class requirements, and the class requirements say that you have to calculate the vessel on the wave crest and on the wave toss.
Computer graphics are used to calculate the stresses and strains on the superstructure in the most extreme circumstances. From wave crest to wave trough, the ship can bend as much as 300 millimeters. But it's lateral movement, the roll of the ship, which can most upset passengers. Just outside Genoa in Italy is the Fincantieri Factory, which is making the stabilizers for the ship. There'll be 2, just aft of the middle of the hull, measuring some 7 meters by 3 meters each.
If you liken a stabilizer fin to an aircraft wing but operating in water, when you look out of an aircraft when it's landing and taking off, they put flaps down at the back edge of the wing, and this gives the wing more lift at low speed. And many stabilizers are built on that principle, in that they have a flap at the aft end which drops down to give more lift. But modern stabilizers, they've managed, by clever design of the fin itself, they've managed to avoid this moving flap on the back of the fin, which was always a maintenance nightmare, to be honest, for ship operators.
The workshop test, we test the performance to see first of all whether the design, which we have done together with Fincantieri, will achieve what is specified in the contract. And this, for example, means that we have to measure the rigging in and the rigging out time of the stabilizers and the time from the top angle to the lowest angle. These are indicators to check whether the specification will be performed at the end of the day. Rigging in time is important, for example, so that later on the captain knows how quick he can forward the stabilizers back in case of emergency, for example.
But it's not all iron and steel. Here in London, the designers have come together with P&O's chairman, Lord Stirling, to assess the interior design of the public rooms.
Hello. Good morning. Good morning. How are you? Nice to see you. How are you?
Fine, thanks.
Right. Where are we? Well, first of all, let's get the prizes out of the way. What's the betting for the game on Saturday, England versus South Africa?
The referee will win that one.
Oh, there speaks a Welshman. He's so carried away with the game 2 weeks ago.
It's not just the designs and plans that are laid out, but the materials that'll be used as well.
So we start on deck 5, where we have the embarkation and the feature staircase, which goes from 5 to 6. And as you arrive on deck
It's really
6,
about getting the approval from the directors and to see the ship as a whole. We work separately in our offices and we don't get the opportunity to come together to really appreciate how our areas flow together and the whole ship will look when she's sailing. So, you know, it's a great opportunity for us to see that development and just to make sure that we know we're creating the right thing for P&O.
through the corridor and
into the bistro called Café Bordeaux.
Now, having just come back and having the pleasure of being made, it's really interesting.
Right. So as we continue into the space, we become more traditional, where we've got the timber floor, very rich finishes, and it's more of the bistro, the restaurant side of it. What they wanted to do was to get the atmospheres to flow between all of the areas. So obviously we had to link Café Bordeaux, which is on deck 8, with Champions and Monte Carlo on deck 7, and that's where you find the rotunda and the staircase which winds up between the two. So what you've also got to do is make all the atmospheres flow together, but make each room feel as though it has its own intimate space, as though you're not sitting in a corridor. So that planning aspect was quite difficult.
As well, on layout, I think some of our layout is very...
P&O's chairman, Lord Stirling, is meeting with the designers to assess plans for the public rooms of the new superliner Aurora.
We needed to be very careful as to how we coordinated the connections between each architect's space. So we needed to draw them together on a number of occasions to check that, for instance, when you moved along a corridor from one public area to another, which had been designed by different architects, that there was a precise fit and that there was going to be a natural transition from one space to the other. So we had to be very, very careful in how we managed that process.
With my own wife, for argument's sake, I can tell you, will not even go up a step like that. There's a feeling of that you might slip through, or you can see down and see a distance.
You can't see down because the step protrudes underneath the one above it. So you'll only see it straight on. Yeah.
But anyway, can I leave it? In presentation, it looks very attractive.
Yeah.
I think what I am saying to you is we've had so many examples, and you always find it when we do the gift ceremony, which we've usually used that as an area. You're continually making very careful all the time, and a number of times people have slipped. There have been quite a few accidents in the States on that. It's a very smooth finish.
Yes, it will be.
But we should emphasise that it's only the first flight that is marble.
Right.
Meanwhile, deep in the heart of the English countryside, another different kind of work of art is underway. John Mills, a graduate from the Royal College of Art, is perhaps most famous for his 3-metre bronze entitled Blitz, which stands outside London's St. Paul's Cathedral. For Aurora, John's been commissioned to make a 10-metre tall bas-relief that'll dominate the ship's main atrium.
This came about because the company Watermark, Hydrodynamics, had done fountains with me, and in this case they wanted a sculpture to go in front of the fountain they were doing for Aurora, and so I'm working directly with them. They came up with a tiny drawing of an idea of a traditional psyche at the world kind of sculpture, and I said, well, if I would do it as long as it was done my way, and so I produced a maquette, a sketch model. And the company, P&O, agreed to that. So we produced the big one from that. So it was scaled up. The final piece is 30 feet high, 7 foot wide, with a full waterfall behind it and free water flowing through it. A few technical problems. Like on fixing down in a ship, that's an important aspect of the technical side of sculpture, because of the lean of the ship. In this case, the water has to stay put in up to 18 degrees of lean. So the way the water flows down the sculpture is very important, and it's part of the modelling to make the water stick to the wall, as it were. That's the one technical aspect. We actually made the piece by carving it in polystyrene. Polystyrene is quite a facile material, and it enables you to work very quickly, and you can get any surface finish you like on it. But it enables us to work on that scale with less equipment, because you can handle the big pieces quite easily because of the light weight. So that's the way we're doing it. From the polystyrene carving, rubber molds are made, and we will be making it look like Lalique glass. So it will be a kind of faux vert made of resin, GRP. It will be translucent, so light will be able to shine through it, and then water running through it as well. So it's quite an interesting piece of sculpture.
Illumination, but to give a general soft illumination over the whole thing. It works really well now. I think we should have you standing behind the real thing with that light.
The effect is very, very good through the texture of the polystyrene. Well, we've been working on it for about 8 or 9 months now. We have the casting to complete and the colouring to complete. And then we'll take it to Pappenberg and actually erect it in the ship, which has to be completed by January, February. So about a year in all.
In Pappenberg, it's time for the keel laying ceremony. It's the start of putting the massive steel blocks together and is an emotional occasion, even if it wasn't Christmas. Inside the huge shed in which the ship will be built, thousands of Meyer-Werft workers gather to witness the ceremony as the keel, block number 1, is lowered into place.
Every time one comes, one tends to think that it's going to be another business occasion, but either a keel laying or a naming, no matter how many you've been to, it still is quite emotional. It's quite special to see the start of such an enormous project.
It's tradition to place coins under the body of the hull, and as the managing director of a 200-year-old family firm, Bernard Meyer isn't one to buck the system.
It's done!
Mr. Meyer, ladies and gentlemen, it's a great pleasure to be with you all here on the occasion of the laying of the keel of the ship that will become Aurora. In 14 months, Aurora will come out of the dock as a completed ship. It is a great credit to Meyer-Werft that they are able to produce a ship in what I still today consider to be an incredibly short time. So Mr. Meyer, thank you very much for you and your fellow workers here at Meyer-Werft for everything that you will be putting into this great new ship. Thank you.
Blocks will arrive fast and furious now. Meyer-Werft have committed themselves to completing the ship in 14 months. Most of the blocks will be assembled here at the yard itself, but some, like those containing the stabilizers, have been subcontracted to other companies. The reason for that is to help speed up the manufacturing process.
We speed up the production for those kinds of ships tremendously. We have concentrated on building passenger ships. We have, of course, consequently optimized our production, the system of building ships, the block system as we call it, or the Lego system.
There'll be 62 blocks in Aurora. Block number 1 was the start of the keel, and number 62 is the funnel, which goes on last. Mainly because it can't be fitted inside the hall itself, as it's too tall. The block system may seem to have removed some of the romance from shipbuilding, but it's methodical and understandable to everyone involved in the project.
Like on the Galeere, boom, boom, every week a new block is coming. So the block system, consequently, was a new system where everybody on the shipyard could follow. He knows block number XYZ is coming in week XYZ, so we have to bring all the material, the logistic to this block in time, And by this, we could optimize the production tremendously.
And it's not all high-tech. Plain old chalk has a serious role to play. The operation is timed down to, if not the second, then the day. As each block is completed and put in place, others are being constructed from the steel sheets. As the sheets are welded together, the sheer scale of the operation becomes more and more apparent.
Put on the profiles and put on the walls, the gears and so on, and from step by step became to a section, and the section, 10 sections build a block, and we build up the blocks up to 600 tons. This is a maximum weight because of our cranes.
The blocks aren't just hollow shells. As much piping and wiring is fixed into each block as is possible, as it's made.
We can work outside in the workshops or in the block because the working time is less and you can work easier and better outside in the block than on board. That's why we try in the blocks to put all the coordination, the piping, ventilation, electrical fittings and so on.
It's this system of prefabrication, building as much as possible into each block, that has enabled the yard to shorten construction time, and that's impressed the engineers at P&O.
In the pre-planning of the ship design, they're trying to optimise that to allow more prefabrication of modules, machinery modules, cabin modules, technical modules throughout the ship, so that once the hull starts building, they can drop these prefabricated modules in, and it speeds up by a great extent the actual production process at the end.
As the prefabricated blocks begin to build up, Aurora starts to look like a massive doll's house. Just a few hours away by road from Pappenberg, in Bremerhaven, is a more traditional yard, SSW. Unlike Meyer Werft, whose building dock is at water level, SSW still has a slipway. But they too have worked for P&O before.
20 years ago or longer, a bit longer, we built first two vessels are calling Norland and North Star. And then we have built 4 or 5 years ago some ferries. They are crossing the channel from Zeebrugge to Dover.
SSW has been subcontracted to build and deliver 4 blocks, including the block that will contain the stabilizers, which themselves have been delivered from Italy and now have to be fitted into the blocks.
We get the contract in the middle of last year, so let's say in June and July 1998, for 4 blocks. From the pre-assembling till launching, we need roughly 5 months. This block is, from the dimension side, 32.1 meter. The length is about 20 meters, and the height up to the third deck, 8.1 meter. Our maximum breadth is 30 meters on the slipway, and these blocks are 32 meters. Therefore, we have also a different way to launch these blocks. After this launching, we have to make a function test of the stabilizer fin boxes, or the stabilizer fins you see behind me. And we have also the function test of both sides before we going right through the River Weser to Pappenberg.
And so, with not a bottle of champagne in sight, the block is launched down the slipway. Almost gets away. The small southern Indian state of Goa is associated in the minds of most Europeans with great beaches, hippie markets and holidays. Yet for P&O, it's long been a place for people to man their ships. Around 50% of the staff on P&O liners are from India, and at one stage, most of those were Goan. It's a connection that stretches back to the middle of the 1800s and the days of empire, and then on through the days of the so-called Great White Ships that used to carry people backwards and forwards to Australia, the Far East and India itself. Goa was once a Portuguese colony, and its links to the sea are strong. P&O's links to India are just as strong, and it was the first liner company to open a permanent office here in Mumbai. As a result of Aurora, there are some 600 vacancies, and the initial interviews alone took a solid 13 days.
We are one of the first cruise companies to have had a manning office in Bombay, in India for that matter. When you start off a company of your own, then you know that you have recruited so many people, you are keeping a track of these people when they are on leave, like when they report to you for medicals. You get your trained people back when you want them back on board.
Yes, Motor.
A lot of cruise companies all over the world are looking forward to, they recruit people from India, because there is an inbuilt tendency to actually be hospitable, welcome people, be nice to them. The other thing is we have a lot of skilled labor in India. We have lots of colleges which actually teach you catering, hospitality management and all. And it's because, again, we have so many people, and they get paid a lot more if they work abroad, if they work outside India, which is a very big incentive. I think that's what makes a lot of companies come to India to take people in.
The search is on in India for staff to man the new P&O liner Aurora.
We prefer people who have passed out of catering colleges and have had their fair bit of experience in the industry, so that we are not recruiting very raw hands, because the cruise industry is something very different. In a restaurant, you have 4 people coming in and take about 2.5 hours to actually get over the meal, 3 courses. But compare this to a cruise ship. You have a 6-course menu, 1,800 people to be fed. You have 1.5 hours to actually finish all these 6 courses. To mold these people to our requirements, we need a little bit of time. So a lot of times we take them at a lower category. They could have worked as an assistant waiter or a waiter in a good hotel in India. But we offer them a job of an assistant to that, or a utility steward, or an assistant cabin steward, and then mold them to our requirements, and they are ready for a promotion to a higher post. A lot of guests.
Training and retraining is carried out at both P&O's Mumbai office and at the nearby catering college.
Bistro is a particular style of restaurant. We put people through a refresher training every time they go on board, before they go on board.
This is to refresh their minds about what are the company policies. If there has been any change in policies, we inform them about it. Refresh their minds about the hygiene standards. Because you've been on leave for 3 months and you've got like, no, you enjoying yourself with the family. You put your mind frame like now back into the job. It's a one-day session that we do before they join.
Back in the much colder climes of northern Germany, the stabilizer blocks are on their way up the river from Bremerhaven. The shipyard is, rather bizarrely, not on the coast but 45 kilometres up the River Ems. As bigger and bigger ships were built, the river had to be dredged so that they could be taken down to the sea, causing a huge political row. Now the yard is putting forward a controversial plan to build a barrier to raise the water levels. Environmentalists are again incensed, claiming that fish in the river will be wiped out by the effects of the barrier, and are trying to block it. But Meerwerft is in one of the poorer areas of Germany, and virtually the whole town of Pappenberg relies on it, directly or indirectly, to make a living. The workers at Meerwerft are determined to protect their jobs and get the ship down to the sea.
Our Discovery Showcase on this 21st century liner continues after the break. Follow her construction in Germany, while the interior design teams work in the UK, Sweden and Norway. Stay with us.